We definitely appreciate you sticking around and listening to everything. Jeff, thanks for continuing to bring your excitement into the room. We really need it now that we're getting into these later hours. So today I'm going to talk about eCTD, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start out with a poll, and I don't think we've done it on this track yet today. So I'm going to ask, how familiar are you with putting together an eCTD submission? So for those of you in the room, you can just raise your hand. For the people that are online, they're actually able to put in their answer, and we're watching it like a horse race here going through. So in the room, right, how familiar are you with putting together an eCTD for your NDA or BLA? Would you say that I'm an experienced expert? Raise your hand if you are. Yes, awesome, thank you. Would you say that you're pretty good at it? Okay, we're getting a few more people in here. Somebody else in my company handles the eCTD? There we go. I predicted that, right, Ethan? I figured that would be what it was. I'm a beginner. Okay, and then wait, what is eCTD? Yes, we always have a couple there too. All right, great. So I think the clear winner there is that others in my company handle it, put it together. But still, many people are familiar with what the eCTD is, and it's really what this presentation is all about. So I'm going to cover some background on eCTD, some guidance that we have out there about it, and metrics for the last fiscal year to give you an idea about how industry is sending in their submissions, and it's actually some really good metrics for you to see. We'll also talk about some points to consider when putting together your submission to send into the FDA. And then also a little bit of background about electronic submission processing. Kind of, if I borrow from Lois, a little bit of that peek behind the curtain of what is CDER's document room doing once they receive these electronic submissions, and maybe how you can help. So, beginning, a little bit of background on the eCTD. This is called the CTD triangle, and I think Swati had one of these graphics in her presentation as well, so I won't spend too much time on it. But the CTD triangle comes from a standard that ICH developed. ICH is that International Conference on Harmonization. It has members from around the world. So it includes regulators as well as the equivalents to our pharma in other countries. And they put together, many years ago, I think this was probably back in the mid-90s, a standard about how to organize the content of a drug application. And they came up with, there are these 5 modules. The first module, module 1, that being region-specific, and then modules 2 through 5, being held to a standard that doesn't matter if you're submitting your drug application to Japan, to Canada, or to the US, the information you put in module 2 is, that's the place for it, no matter which country you're sending it to, or module 3 and so forth. It's a way to harmonize things. And so I will switch on to the next slide here about guidance. So as hopefully everybody knows here in the room and online, eCTD is required when you're submitting to an NDA, a BLA, a drug master file, an abbreviated NDA, and commercial INDs. So that requirement, at least for the NDAs, BLAs, and ANDAs, that went into effect back in 2017. The FDA sees nearly 100% compliance on that. And then for the drug master files and the commercial INDs, that requirement for eCTD went into effect last year. And we're seeing close to 100% compliance on that as well. So the future is now for eCTD and electronic submissions, I will tell you that. Please do not send paper or non-eCTD submission to these application types. When the document room sees them, they are going to send you a letter saying, sorry, we can't accept this. This is against the guidance that's out there. Another thing is that when you decide that you're going to submit study data to a submission, please remember you do need to submit what's called a study tagging file in that submission. And my colleague Ethan Chen, who'll be following me up, will be talking in depth about what is required in your electronic submission when it comes to submitting study data. So we have a really nice eCTD website available. It has all the information. It has guidances. It has how to get started, things like how to get a gateway account, all sorts of information on eCTD. So definitely recommend that you take a look at that website. And just a little note down here, for DMFs, you see there's little asterisks there. DMFs, when it comes to type 3 DMFs, those currently have until May 2020 before submissions have to be in eCTD. So here are a few metrics to share with you. So CDER receives approximately 200,000 electronic submissions annually via the gateway. That's the electronic submission gateway, called the ESG. Nearly 192,000, so almost all of the 200,000 came in eCTD format, which is absolutely outstanding. Because the difference between an electronic submission coming in eCTD versus non-eCTD is whether or not it comes in a structured format. So if the submission comes in a structured way, CDER is able to utilize its IT infrastructure to automatically process these submissions, to help use tools on the back end, to help the reviewers find the information that they're looking for quicker. It helps them meet the GDUFA, GDUFA, and BSUFA deadlines that they have with these user fees. The nice thing about this graph, as you can see, in addition to those blue bars showing that more and more of the submissions are coming in electronically, is that that red line is showing you the percentage of the electronic submissions that are in eCTD format. And so as of last year, you can see nearly all of them that are coming in are following eCTD. Here's another look at by application type of how they're coming in. And what this is showing that in fiscal year 2018, nearly 100% of the regulatory submissions for the NDAs, the BLAs, ANDAs were in eCTD format. And INDs are closely behind there last year at 96%, and then drug master files at 78%. Pretty confident that once fiscal year 2019 is over and we pull the metrics on that, INDs, those commercial INDs, will be up at 100%. I want to talk about a few points to consider when you're preparing to submit your NDA or BLA into CDER. So number one, become familiar with the eCTD website. Don't wait until after you've already produced your content to then go to the website and look at it. Look at it as early in the process as you can. This website has important dates about guidance relating to electronic submissions. It has a quick link section. It'll show you the eCTD submission standards. So this is a document that lists all the technical specifications for eCTD, all the rules. It's all there in one place for you. Also the FDA data standards catalog. That, in addition to eCTD requirements, it also has the study data standards and requirements as well that you should be familiar with. It also has important notices. For example, a couple of years ago when we started providing a third acknowledgement back to sponsors who are submitting via the gateway, we advertised that on our eCTD website to let you know that was coming. If we were to add a new validation, we would let you know right here on the front page that that document has been updated and there's something new here for you to look at. And then finally on this page, for those of you that maybe haven't submitted an eCTD before, we have a link here about how to get started. If you click on that, it gives you a whole host of helpful information. So the next piece here is the submission hierarchy, right? Where should I place my documents? Our electronic submission team gets these questions a lot. We get them via email, through phone calls. Sometimes we get them at conferences. People will ask, they'll say, I have all my documents, they're created. I'm ready to send this into FDA, but I'm not sure where to place these. Should this document go under Module 1? Should it go under Module 5? What heading should it go under? And what we do there is we direct the person to follow the common technical document structure. Again, that's an ICH standard. And you can find great information in a document. It's called the Comprehensive Table of Contents, Headings, and Hierarchy. I have a hyperlink right here on the slide deck. If that document, and this little screenshot from it, and this just gives you just a small taste of the type of granularity this document goes into, right? So I mean, on my screen it is kind of small, but it gets down into, for example, if you're sending in an administrative information, it'll get all the way down to the 4th sub-level heading on where you should put your particular document. If the comprehensive table of contents, heading, and hierarchy isn't clear enough for you, there's also the ICH M4 document called Organization of the Common Technical Document. That has some additional information that you can utilize as well. Another area is the file format and PDF specifications that CDER and CBER have. So when you're creating the content, you want to be able to follow these guidances that are out there. There's one called Specifications for File Format using eCTD specifications. And this tells you things like what type of file we're expecting to see underneath these different headings, underneath the different modules. So for example, is CDER expecting to see PDF files in this section? Are they expecting to see study data files, like those transport files, XPT files? Does it find that submitting Word documents in this section is something that they're looking for? So this gives you a good framework for the types of documents that we're looking for. Also is FDA's PDF specifications. So this is a document that talks about when you're creating your PDF file, what rules should you be following? So for example, font size is always a big one. It causes the reviewers a lot of trouble when they get a document and the font is font 6 or font 8 or something like that. And they're trying to review this and it's really small and hard to see. So for example, in the PDF specifications, it says your font size should be font 12, for example. It also talks about some tips about how you should put in graphics in your PDF documents or charts, things like that. It talks about when you should be including hyperlinks and bookmarks in your PDF document. For example, if it's 5 pages or longer, it says you should really be including these hyperlinks and bookmarks. The reason for that is it makes it easier for the review offices to navigate through the document and find where they're going. You know, some of these documents can really be quite large, and without that nice table of contents at the beginning, it will take them a lot longer to get through, and they might not see something you're trying to get through to them. And just lastly about the PDF specifications, sometimes our team will get a question from an applicant who says, my eCTD submission is all ready to go. I'm ready to hit send and send this in. But I noticed that my CRO, the PDF that they sent me, it doesn't follow the guidelines that are in this PDF specification. Is that okay? And what our team will say is, well, it's really not okay. You know, you should be following what these PDF specifications say. Now, you can go ahead and submit it, but it's possible that when the review office gets it, they're going to ask you to resubmit this document. And that takes more time for you, more time for them. So it's best to make sure that this type of specification is known to everyone in your company that's producing these files, to anyone that you're outsourcing. Make sure they all know what the requirement is. That way, when you get their finished product, it's in alignment. Study data. Whether you're submitting study data or you think you're going to submit study data in the future, it is so important, especially this year now, to be familiar with the study data requirements. FDA has a web page dedicated to this called the Study Data for Submission to CDER and CBER. There's a hyperlink to it in the slide deck. This has key study data resources. First of all, it's got the study data guidance, and this is a binding guidance. It means you do have to follow it. It also has what's called the technical rejection criteria for study data. This is a document that was posted up there in the last couple of years. It was recently updated this past January. The purpose for the technical rejection criteria for study data, which my colleague Ethan's going to talk about in depth more next, is that it's going to tell you what are the eCTD validation criteria. What are they? What are they going to be looking at in terms of the study data you're submitting at? What are you at risk for if you fail validation? So it's very important that you read this, become really familiar with it, and we want you to ask questions about it too. So we realize this is a new thing, something that we pore over in the agency and look at all the time. We may understand it perfectly, but someone who's on the outside looking in and reads the document, they may see something where it's just confusing and not clear. They may catch something. And so we really want all of you to go out and read this document. And as you know, Doug Throckmorton had said earlier, challenge us, right? So read the document. If you see something that doesn't make sense or you have questions about it, let us know. Because today, we're not rejecting submissions for failing this validation, but our plan is to start rejecting submissions within the next year. It could be as early as the end of this year, early next year. And then there's the Study Data Technical Conformance Guide. And OGD has a website on ANDA forms and submission requirements website. So if you were submitting a generic drug, you want to be familiar with that website as well. If you have questions, which I'm sure you will, right? Anything study data related, we want you to direct them to this edata@fda.hhs email address. That way it'll get routed to the right group. We can all look at it, come up with an answer, and respond back to you, and also it'll help us further improve the whole process. Now, further on when you're preparing your submission to the FDA, you need an application number. Definitely need that. If you're submitting via the gateway in eCTD format, you have to have an application number. You need a gateway account. If your submission that you're sending in is 10 gigabytes or less, it needs to come through the gateway. And on our eCTD website, we have a link to exactly what the process is to request an application number and how to get an electronic submission gateway account. So now that you have all your documents together, you've got your application number, now it's time to generate the eCTD, right? I want to put this into eCTD format. So how do you do it? You're going to use an eCTD publishing tool, or you're going to use an eCTD tool vendor to do this. So utilize the publishing tool to capture the administrative information, map the content to the CTD sections headings, and generate the final submission in the eCTD format. That includes all the specific eCTD technical files, we call them backbone files, and the right folder structure. It's very important that you do this because we do have automated validation that checks the submission as soon as it comes in the door. And you're actually, everyone is really, most part, is doing a great job because our rejection rate for something coming in and not being an eCTD is less than 2%. So it really is going well. Optionally, after you publish your eCTD submission and you're ready to send it in, you could validate it on your side if you choose to. It's optional. There are some tool vendors out there that provide free validation software. If you do a Google search for it, it'll turn up some hits. We are at FDA, we're not allowed to actually give you private company names to go to, but I can tell you do a Google search and you'll see it. And you can also request the electronic submission team to give you feedback on that eCTD submission. If you would like the electronic submission team to give you feedback, you can send an email to eSubTesting and just let them know, hey, I have an NDA, I have a BLA, it's my first time submitting an eCTD. I'd like to send a sample eCTD submission to you and get feedback. And and the team will be happy to do that for you. It's a great resource. And if you're curious about the specific eCTD validation criteria codes and the descriptions, you can get to that on the eCTD website in a document called the eCTD Submission Standards. That's just a screenshot of what the eCTD submission standards look like there. And then finally, the last piece I wanted to talk about is kind of that peek back behind the curtain on the CDER document room process for once your submission comes in. So we're really good right now at automating the process of the gateway receiving your submission and then having it automatically be sent to the center. So in my case, having it be sent to CDER, and then the CDER systems looking into it, processing it, validating the submission. But as of up to last year, we were still having the document room staff read the cover page of almost all of these submissions, which is about 850 a day. And they were looking at that cover letter page to get enough information off the submission to direct it to the right review division. Well, we said to ourselves, you know what? Now almost all the submissions are coming into eCTD format. They're coming in standardized. So can't we just look at the standardized metadata that's coming in with the submission and have a tool look at it and then automatically assign it to review divisions? So that's exactly what we're doing now. And the benefit to industry is your reviewer is going to get your submission faster. In many cases, it saves at least a day. It might even save 2 days. On the FDA side, it's less manual effort that's going on in there. But with every improvement that we have in automation, it always comes with challenges. So one thing that we've noticed is sometimes the information that you're submitting while you're using your eCTD publishing tool, that information that's published in the eCTD backbone files, sometimes it contradicts what you put on your regulatory form, like the 356H form or the 1571 form. So here's an example of a eCTD data discrepancy. We call it, can you guess the correct regulatory activity? So in here, the first one is looking at US regional XML. So that's one of these backbone files specific to the eCTD. So in there, the information in there is coded as a CBE type of supplement, right? But on the form 356H, prior approval is indicated in there. When something like that happens, it's a direct contradiction. And so the computer software that we have running, it can't automatically go to the next step. So it has to kick it out to the document room staff, and then you need an actual person to go in, open up the submission, go to the cover letter to view it. Your submission should still make it through, but now you lose the benefit of efficiency of the automated process. It's back to taking a day or two before your review office will see it. So just in summary here on the data discrepancy impact, when data is submitted correctly in the eCTD backbone file and the regulatory form, the submission can be efficiently routed through to the review office. But if there's a conflict, we can't automate it. That's basically what this slide is talking about. So in summary, remember we've got important guidance requirements, submissions to NDAs, BLAs, master files, your ANDAs, commercial INDs must be submitted in eCTD format. And when you're submitting a study information in modules 4 and 5, those study files need to be accompanied by a study tagging file as well. And when you're preparing to submit electronically, remember these helpful hints, right? You make use of that eCTD website that we have. It's got a great amount of information on it. You're just doing yourself a disservice if you don't take the time to just go ahead and look at it and share it with your office. You want to align the content with that CTD, that common technical document structure. That's the triangle, the modules 1 through 5. And technical rejection criteria for study data, that's my appeal to you to make sure that either you or you bring back to the appropriate people in your office for them to read through that document and have them, look at it, decide if they understand what it says, if they have questions or comments, to please let the eData team know about it. And then finally, our document rooms, we have this automation process that's being implemented, and it's going to continue to improve to get your submission to the review office quicker. But we need your help, because sometimes we do see that things can contradict each other between what you put in the eCTD software versus what you put on that, for example, the 356H form, or if it's an IND, the 1571. So that's it. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to Chen, and then once Ethan's done, I'll be back up here to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Jonathan and I always come together there. He's presenting the eCTD contents, and I'm presenting the study data information. It's very much like a two-sided of a coin, and both of them being processed by our division called Division of Data Management Services Solution. So what our division do is, when you submit application, and all the submission coming through our division, and we have a document room. We receive them from the gateway if it's electronic submitted, or if you submit in paper base for research IND, we still receive paper. They come to the document room, we receive in jacket, somebody haul it, and in the mail room, open the cover letter, read every page of them, not every page of the cover letter, to code them, and then they route to review divisions. And we average doing about 850, as Jonathan mentioned, per day. Annually, about 220,000 submissions we process. So we have two operations there. One is handling the day-by-day operation, receiving submissions, coded, routed, validate them, and make sure they reach the right destination. And the second part, we have a policy and a capability on, which basically make sure we draft the guidance to industry, provide input to the guidance issued by the other offices, develop technical capability, being able to receive those information more efficiently, validate the information, routing those information. So those are the operations that we have. So what I'm talking about today is talking about, as Jonathan's part is what he said, the future is today. And I'm trying to say, what I'm presenting is what we envision future's future, and we want to make a future's today. So about the study data, and I'm going to ask the same question there. How many of you are aware of the study data technical rejection criteria as a requirement to your submissions for the study data submit to FDA? How many of you are aware of that requirement there? I'm glad you have 3 and 4 people there, and that's the case. I still puzzled, because this is a guidance being issued about 5 years ago, and per 745 AA, and the FDA does have the authority to require the data being submitted in standards, including FDA data standards catalog, in December 2014. And we issued the standardized study data guidance to the industry, which is 5 years ago. That requires all NDA, ANDA, BLA, or start after December 17, 2016, must comply with the standardized data requirement. And same requirement applicable for commercial IND started December 17, 2017. So I hope somebody in your office or company are aware of that criteria, because it's best to prepare those data when you design the study. And it's so much harder when you deal with it when you're ready to submit those information to FDA. And I actually asked this question earlier this year, and I get the same amount of response. In the later conference, like last month or so, I see increasing awareness of such a standard. And my next question I'm probably going to ask is, how many of you believe FDA will actually reject your submission based on the study data technical rejection criteria? Now, I don't have the fancy tool like Jonathan have. I think those numbers probably less than 20%. But it is real. It is real. So what we're saying there is in order to support this particular enforcement, we did a bunch of things there. And we did a analysis earlier, and for all the information we collected since December 18, 2016 to March 31st, 2018, we want to see at that point what are the conformance rate and how many studies being submitted to us contain high errors which are rejectable. So those are the two arrows that we are checking, which is 1734 and 1736. They're very simple arrows, and that we see they are, you have to have a TS data set, and you have to have a correct study start date, so we can determine if your study should be passed or should we check the other criteria to make sure they are in alignment with the technical rejection criteria. And we also require 1736 arrow, which means the defined XML and DM ADSL files exist in corresponding to each other. So those are very simple since we're not checking any contents inside of the data set. The purpose of that is, as you see, we increasingly automating our process for those 220,000 submissions that we receive, especially for those contain study data to route into the review divisions. We want to be able to use modern tools to be able to review them efficiently. In order to do that, we need to know where those studies are, what are the general information of your study, so we'll be able to load in those data into those review tools that we have. If you fail those rules, we cannot use our tools, and we'll delay the process when the reviewer is accessing them. They cannot conduct advanced analytics on them, which are the goals that FDA is moving forward to. So those are the need to having the study data rejection criteria when we have 5 years ago, and that's still being the case today. So, and from the previous analysis, this is what we have. And for all the number that you see about all submission that we receive, 32% of them reporting either 1734 or 1736 error, which they are rejectable errors. And the further breakdown are available here for each application type between NDA, ANDA, BLA, and commercial INDs. So that's the analysis we're presenting in the last year DIA and the SBIA Generic Drug Forum. Probably for this one's the first time to present, and I hope this is become a familiar topic for next year and for years to come in order for us to actually turn the switch on. So we actually conduct another analysis this year, and just to see how the numbers are improved from last year to this year. So this time, we extended our analysis for the full CY18, January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2018. So we do see the awareness are increased and the error rate are dropped, and down to somewhere about 21%. I think it's a little bit better, and we actually conduct a little bit more internal analysis for the recent quarter that we have. The actual numbers about to drop about another 5% of those. So we're somewhere about 15-17% of error rate that we see today. And certainly the percentage is a little bit better than what I see today. The hands are raised here. So, and that's the trend that we have. Overall conformance, the error rate is still between 20 to 30% range, which also means if we enforce the technical rejection criteria for study data as of today, 1 out of 5 submissions will be turned back to you, and you will be required to fix them and before FDA will ever receive them. In responding to those numbers that we see in January 2019, we updated technical rejection criteria for the purpose of help industry to understand what those requirements are, to boost awareness of what they are, and identify the issues that we see in the analysis and understanding them, emphasize certain area so they become easier for industry to follow. So those are the results that we have. We're providing more details to arrow 1734 and the 1736, telling people what we're looking for. And we also emphasize the existing media arrow 1735 to be high arrow because it's a bridge between for us to check 1734. Otherwise, we won't be able to. And we emphasize the rule of 1789, which is STF file, which should be there anyway for each of the studies submit to. And we kind of providing clarification in table 1 for each of the criteria that's applicable for which section and which modules. Provide examples in appendix 1 as well as the sample of TSXPT file as required by arrow 1734. In addition, we're also providing what we call the self-check work list because from the previous meetings, the industry tell us we want to be able to know what are the arrow FDA see from the submission that I turned in. So given this self-check worksheet, hopefully you can run yourself. You'll be able to see what arrow that we see, and you'll be able to address it before you turn in your application. So those are the tools that we prepare. So what are those changes there? This is what I highlight here, and that's probably the most important part. In the top line, what we say before this particular update, it says FDA may refuse to file for MDA and BLA, or refuse to receive for ANDA, and which means FDA will pass the validation. All your submissions have or without errors will be routed to the filing department of NDA and for the OGD and the OND. They will make the decision if it should be refused to file or refused to receive. The new guidance said FDA will not accept the application, which means it will be turned away from the gateway automatically. You will receive a notice and say FDA will not receive due to an error being reported in those technical rejection criteria. That also means OND, OGD filing department will not even see the submission coming to that door. So that we emphasize the need to follow those rules, and the actions will be taken to enforce those rules there. And that's actually an action we're taking because we hear from the conference, from the industry, and the people, many of them aware of those rules, strongly believe that those are the rules will never be enforced. And we just want to say that is not true. And those are the more clarified rules, comparison between the previous version of technical rejection criteria and the new version of technical rejection criteria, with the highlight area indicating what are the changes they are. And the reason we emphasize 1735 and 1789 rules is because those are the bridge between the TS file study ID and the STF study ID there. So we'll be able to locate appropriate TS file for each of the study that you submit. And that's the common error that we see in our analysis due to what we believe a gap between the people who prepare the submission with the people who prepare the study itself. There's an understanding gap there, and the study ID simply does not match. So those are we do see the needs to follow that. And further down, we break the analysis down at a study level for the non-clinical and the clinical study. For each type of application, those detailed numbers are available here. In addition to, from the eData and the eCTD submission mailbox, we received quite a bit of questions about where should I put in my study under which folder. So this particular slide we include as part of the study data technical conformance guide. Try to tell people how you organize your information, which folder should be put under, where you put your STF file, where you put your TS file, put your DM, define files, SETM, add-in file, legacy data, and hopefully this can be some help to you when you prepare your submission to us. And we also emphasize the need of TS file. In the same time, we hear there's a challenge for certain type of study. It is difficult to prepare a full spec of TS file simply because many of those information are not available at the time when you design and put together TS file for those type of study. So we kind of designed a new format called a simplified TSXPT file following all the spec of the existing specification, but only with 4 fields for us to know when those study start dates are, so we can determine if those studies are started before the enforcement date, we can simply bypass all the validation rules there. So those are the 4 fields that's needed, and those are the format that we expect to see in the latest received submission. We do see people start to using the simplified TS file there. However, some of them does not specifically follow the format as what we indicated here, such as, for example, the TSVAL for the study file study date format should be YYYYMMDD, and they are turning in a different format. So those are the things that should be easy to follow, and we put in these slides there. Hopefully you pay attention to what we wanted. And another common mistake we see from the submission that we received is error 1734, which is the largest percentage of error that we see, is a mismatch of study ID between the STF file as well as the TSXPT data set. And the study ID in the STF file is not 100% match with the study ID including the TSXPT file, even though the specification from the ICH M2 as well as the CDER standard both indicate the study ID should be unique, unambiguously identify the study across all submissions, and they should be matched. So we've seen very creative discrepancy between these 2 documents from the people who prepare them, and there are all kinds of variation. And when you're eyeballing them, you'll be able to see they are the same, and they'll have something called the Jonathan Study 1, and another one called the Jonathan Prepared Study 1, so you'll know it is the same study, but unless you eyeball them, you will not be able to use a computer program to do that. So this is something we believe it's easy to follow. It's probably a gap between the people who prepare the data set and the people who prepare the whole submission. So it will be important for people to be aware of that or bring back this information to your regulatory department when they prepare the submission, make sure they follow those rules there. And we further developed this table and tells you in which cases you need to submit a full TS, in which cases you need to submit a simplified TS for your non-clinical data set, for your clinical data set. What if it's a study started prior to December 17, 2016, or after that day for NDA, BLA, or corresponding rules for the commercial INDs. So hopefully this one will be clearly indicate what the requirement is, so you don't have to guess fall into this category or how should I prepare to that. And the emphasis on the 1735 and 1789 again. This is your STF file, and many times the STF file is probably prepared by the publisher. However, we want to emphasize this is a bridge between the submission and your study data set there. So 1789, of course, every study must have STF file there, and they need to be properly tagged per 1735, which means all your study data set has to have a file tag in the STF file, and all your STF file tag must correspond to the file you have. And those are the requirements. If you don't have this one, we don't have the bridge be able to locate your study. And in responding to the industry request, how we be able to help everybody to follow the rules. So we have multiple tools in place to supporting for anybody who has question to prepare the study in conforming with the technical rejection criteria. We published the new updated technical rejection criteria on the website. We also have the self-check work list available on the website, as well as the instruction how to use those self-check work lists, which I will show in the next couple of slides here. You'll also be able to submit a sample study data to the eData team that has a mailbox available in the end of the slide as well for any questions you have, and they'll be able to check the sample study data that you submit to us and tell you what problem that we see, and you'll be able to submit your applications via the gateway. And this is the resource that provides the linkage of those information I just mentioned earlier. The web page of FDA with the link to the study data technical rejection criteria, technical rejection criteria self-check work list, and the instruction for the self-check work list. So this is how it looks like. And this particular sheet is designed for especially for the first time you submitted the study data. It's very simple. We try to leverage text form like of a form, and you'll be able to check off each of the box that we check, and you'll be able to see in what sections that you are likely to get a validation error of what type. And it is supposed to allow you to check off those boxes. You will see what it is, and it also has an instruction associated with it if you have a question. And you can certainly, again, send an email to the eData team, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And those are the 5 sections that we have, and I think it should be pretty easy to answer them if you have, if you're ready to submit your application, and certainly a good exercise to check on that. And questions such as which center you submit to, and the rules for different centers are different, and what is the study ID that you have in mind versus what the study ID you have in the TS file versus what study ID you have in your STF file, ID matching. If they don't match, you're more likely getting an error of 1734. And what study tagging file for your DM file, what study tagging file for your defined XML file, are they following the guidance? And if not, you're likely to be rejected by 1736. So it's very simple to use, and I don't know how many of you ever get to see this one there. Hopefully we see increasing usage of that, and we will also love to hear your feedback about your experience using those sheets, so we can help you to clarify those forms, make updates, and to address the issues during your usage. The timeline, I guess everybody will be interested to know. As I mentioned, the guidance is published about 5 years ago. compared to what Jonathan mentioned, eCTD guidance when we started about 15 years ago. And for study data, the guidance is only 5 years ago. But however, those are the requirements per guidance for any of the study after those dates. And you need to comply with the study data technical rejection criteria. And we revised the study data technical rejection criteria January 2019, along with the supporting tools that we have. You go along with our validation tools that we are currently using FDA. We're in the process of updating our validation tool, and we intend to enforce it towards the end of the year or early next year, which we will providing a 90-day notice to the industry. So we're pretty serious about that. And here's a summary. And based on what we have, even today, about 1 out of 5 submission contained study data still report 1734, 1736 errors. And that's part of the reason we updated technical rejection criteria as well as providing supporting tools. At this point, we haven't rejected any, but we closely monitor them to analyze what type of error. And pretty much we repeat our analysis every quarter to see how much improvements that we see from the conformance standard. And we are actually planning to implement that in sometime in the upcoming year. Along with it, there's all the reference that are relevant to the standardized study data. Thank you for listening to me.
All right, we seem to be building a trend. We have 2 minutes and 32 seconds for Q&A. That's probably one each. You guys are going to get to meet with them in just a few minutes. Well, just 45 minutes. They'll be in one of theirs. Let's go ahead and take that one right there. Oh, that's probably not on. Okay.
Hi, Aruna, PharmaPro Consulting. So thank you for elaborating what happens when there is a rejection. My question is, how does it impact the timelines? Which again means that the sponsor should be preparing for this early on such that they don't get a rejection.
So for timelines, right, if you talk about like review clock timelines, if you get one of these rejections, this is what we call a high severity eCTD rejection. So it gets rejected at the door. So as Ethan was saying in his presentation, say you had that 1734 validation error, and that talks about not having a trial summary file in your submission with study data. What would happen is the submission would fail validation, and you would get an immediate acknowledgement letter back through the ESG, the Electronic Submission Gateway, saying that your submission is not received, did not come through. It would cite that validation error number, 1734, with a general recommended resolution. And so in this case, your submission was never received by CDER, so the review clock never even started. You would have to fix the error, resubmit, and then the review clock would start the second time around that your submission comes in and passes through there. That's why it's so important that everybody pay attention to this technical rejection criteria for study data, because it does impact whether or not your submission as a whole is going to be accepted by CDER for the review clock to even start.
So follow-up to that question is, here we're not even talking about errors as far as C-disk mapping, etc. is concerned. We're just talking about data management or submission errors?
The technical rejection criteria has a very specific rules be indicate for those errors we check. We're not checking every errors as what CDER specified. Those are very high level rules, and there are 4 rules right now, and 1734, 35, 36, 1789 rules. And there are other errors are not rejectable errors, which is checking at a later time.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. And for the sake of time management, I'm going to have to go ahead and cut Q&A short. Those of you online, you can still submit questions to CDER SBIA at fda.hhs.gov. Those of you here in the room, you'll have a chance to talk with Jonathan and Ethan in about 45 minutes or so, but please help me thank them coming and giving this overview. I'm going to turn it over to Ray